All right, so let's go over these practice questions for our normal distribution. So the first one says the average score on the test was an 88 with a standard deviation of 4. So because your average or your mean was 88, that's what's going to go in the middle. And then a standard deviation of 4 means I'm going to add 4 going this way to fill in these numbers and then subtract 4 going this way. So if I add 4, right, I get 92, then 96, and 100. And then if I subtract 4, I get 84, 80, and 76. So going this way, I just add that standard deviation, and going this way, I just subtract that standard deviation. All right, so now this is where we get into that empirical rule that we talked about in the notes. So what percent of scores are between 84 and 92? So between 84 and 92, I'm one standard deviation away on both sides, right? I went one this way and one this way, which means that since I'm one on each side, that's going to be 68%. Remember, one standard deviation is 68%, 2 is 95%, and 3 is 99.7%. So for the next one, I want to know what the score is between 80 and 96. So now I've gone 2 standard deviations away on both sides, right? 2 this way and 2 that way. So now I'm looking at 2 standard deviations away, which is that 95%. And then this one says 76 and 100. So again, now I'm 3 standard deviations away on both sides. So then that's 99.7, right? These are just based off of that rule. Nothing changed about those. All right, so now if I want to go between 76 and 96, this is where it gets a little tricky because 76 is 3 standard deviations away on this side, right? So I'm 3 standard deviations away, but 96 is 2 standard deviations away. So I'm not going the same distance on both sides, but think of it in terms of halves, right? If this is out to 99.7 going both directions, then I'm going half of the distance just going to one side. So for 3 standard deviations, I would do half of that 99.7 since I'm 3 standard deviations away. Then, because this is 2 standard deviations on this side, right? So again, I'm not going 2 standard deviations in both directions. I'm just doing one of the two. That's why it's half of it. I'm doing half of 95. So then when I do half of 99.7, right, I'm just doing half of 99.7, or 99.7 divided by 2, plus 95 divided by 2. I get 97.35, which means this is 97.35%. All right. I'm going to skip to this one because this one is similar to the one we just did. So this one says, what percent of students score between an 84 and a 100? So if I think about how many standard deviations I travel, on this side, I'm traveling 1 to get to 84. So this is 1 standard deviation away. And then on this side, I have to travel 3. So this is 3 standard deviations away. So this is where we're breaking it up into halves again because I didn't go the same distance on both sides. So on one half, I went 1 standard deviation away. So that's half of the 68%, right? Because 1 standard deviation is 68%, plus half of the 3 standard deviations, which is 99.7%. So then again in my calculator, if I do 68 divided by 2, and then add that to 99.7 divided by 2, I get 83.85. All right, so then these ones are a little bit different. This one says what percentage of students score below an 88%. So my 88% is right in the middle. So if we think about how much is below that, 88 is my halfway mark. So that means 50% of my scores are below 88. So then my next one asks me how many are above 92. So I need to know this region over here, right? I want to know all of these values. That's kind of hard to find because it doesn't include the middle with it. So what I'm going to do is figure out how much this is and then subtract it from 1 because all of this is going to total to 1. So if I know the value of this piece, then I know when I add together this piece, they should equal 1. Well, you already know that this part is 50%. So then this sliver here is half of a 1 standard deviation away, right? 1 standard deviation away on one side is half of that 68%. So then that would give me 34. So then 50 plus 34 means this side is 84. So again, this whole picture has to total to 100. So then 84 plus this little amount is going to equal 100. Well, that little amount would be 16. All right, I'm going to do one more with you, and then the answers are posted on Schoology for the ones on the back, but I think it would be a good idea for you to try them on your own first before checking your answers, just to make sure you know what to do and you're feeling good about this process. All right, so it says the average time to run a mile is 14 minutes with a standard deviation of 2 minutes. So 14 is my average, that goes in the middle. And then with the standard deviation of 2, I'm going to add 2 going this way, add 2, and then I'm going to subtract 2 going this way. Subtract 2, subtract 2, subtract 2. So if I want to know what percent run between 8 and 20 minutes, right, on both sides, I'm 3 standard deviations away. So then our rule says, right, just to write it again, 1 standard deviation is a 68%, 2 standard deviations contains 95%, and 3 standard deviations contains 99.7%. That's if you go the same distance on both sides. So since I went 3 in both directions, that's a 99.7%. 99.7% of all people run the mile between 8 and 20 minutes. All right, so this one says what percent run between 10 and 18. So again, I'm evenly going 2 standard deviations out. So since I went the same value on 2 standard deviations, that's going to give me that 95%. And then the last one is asking me 1 standard deviation out, right? Between 12 and 16 is 1 standard deviation on both sides. So that is 68%, right? Those are all just following the empirical rule exactly how it's written. Nothing changes there. All right, so now if I want to run it between 10 and 20 minutes, that's where this gets tricky. So on the 10 side, I went 2 standard deviations over. So this is 2 standard deviations. For 20, I went 3 standard deviations. Now remember, you're only doing this in one direction. I'm not going 2 on both sides. I'm going 3 on one side. So that's why we use half, right? I went half of the 2 standard deviations, so that's 95%. And then I went half of 3 standard deviations, which is 99.7. So then we calculate this to figure out what it means to go from here, right, if I was shading in this area all the way to 3 standard deviations. So then if I do 95 divided by 2 plus 99.7 divided by 2, I get 97.35. All right, I'm going to do this one because it's just like the one we did. So between 14 and 16. So between 14 and 16 is actually just from the middle over this way. So I only moved 1 standard deviation over, but I only did it on one side. Remember, standard deviations move in both directions. So if it was between 12 and 16, that's where we get that empirical rule. But I only moved on one side. So that's why we use that half. So then I use half of the 1 standard deviation rule, which is 68%. So half of 68 gives me 34. All right, so then if I want to know what percent runs slower than 18 minutes, right? That means their time is longer. So I want to know this little bitty tail over here, these values on this side. So just like the one above, it's kind of hard to know like what exactly how much this is just from looking at it, but I can use my empirical rule in reverse to tell me this side, right? The whole thing's going to add up to 100. So if I know what's everything going on over here, then I know this little piece is going to equal 100 when I add them together. Well, we know that this half of the graph is 50%, right? It cuts it in half, so this is 50%. Well, then on this side, I went 2 standard deviations this way, but just in one direction. So 2 standard deviations in one direction is half of the 95%. So if I do 95, right, if I do 95 divided by 2, I get 47.5. So these two added together, right, that's 97.5% live in this section. All of this makes up 95.7% of the information, which means this little teeny area over here is the rest to add that to 100. So if I did 100, right, 100 minus 97.5, I end up with 2.5. All right, so then the next part of this says what percent runs faster than 12 minutes, right? So that's going to be this area over here. So that's going to be this section now. So it's pretty much exactly what we just did. We're just reversing the directions, right? I need to figure out what this part is, and then I can subtract from 100 to figure out this part. So I know this half over here is 50. And then I just have to figure out what this piece is to know what the total is on this half. So this is 50. I'm 1 standard deviation over here away. So that's my half of that 1 standard deviation, which is 68%. So half of 68 gives me 34. So this section's 34. This whole section all the way to the very end is 50 now because I'm doing all of that. So I've got 100 minus 84 is the area that I found over here, right? The 50% of this side of the graph plus the 34% of this section. So then I get 16. All right, hopefully that helped. Like I said, go ahead and try the back two and then look on Schoology to check your answers.